Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me my 15-minute slot today. It's much appreciated, and I'll try and keep to time. I will be here afterwards if you've got any further questions, and I know we have a Q&A. So let's see if I can drive this. So, back. So MyPay is a company that offers a number of different payment solutions, and primarily today I'm going to talk about a social payment solution called Request to Pay, and I'll talk through that more in a moment. But also we have a commercial agreement with MySQUAR, and we just heard from Eric, to enable and provide payment services into Myanmar through MySQUAR. So that could include and will include receiving international remittance into Myanmar, into the MySQUAR environment, to allow people to top up their games and to make any other kind of premium content payments that may be required through the MySQUAR ecosystem, but also how we could facilitate mobile payments on a wider scale through leveraging the significant number of users that MySQUAR has. So we, if you like, we depend upon MySQUAR's success too, because we have a commercial agreement with them that we can leverage and use that environment. I do believe in the opportunity in Myanmar that comes through that. We also have plans to further leverage our social payments technology and solutions, and I'll talk you through those in a minute. We'll come on to those slides. Quick slide, one that everybody has in their presentation. This is the makeup of our board and our advisors. And you'll see there's some significant experience across a number of different sectors within Asia, also within Europe. I can make this presentation available to you as well afterwards as I speed through it. So from a global perspective, we're not just focused in Myanmar, so we are focused upon providing payment solutions across Asia, but also into Europe and potentially US. But our focus at the moment is Asia and Europe, to leverage the Myanmar platform through MySQUAR and to take our social payment solution into remittances. And again, we'll come on to that in a minute. So what is RTP? RTP stands for Request to Pay. And for those of you in the payments world, I boringly refer to it as an alternative socially enabled payment method. So what does that actually mean? So there are a number of different use cases. I think some, if not all of us in this room with children, will be familiar with the term bank of mum and dad. And this, I'm afraid, isn't going to help you, but it will simplify the process and may save you some time. So Request to Pay is a payment method that appears at checkout. So my son is at university, he wants to come home for the weekend. He phones me up and says, "Dad, I need to come home." I said, "Fantastic. Can you buy my train ticket for me?" Then we had the conversations what he's done with his money and its student union and everything else. And normally what happens is we spend half an hour on the phone, what train, what station, what time, etc., with me tapping away trying to book the ticket for him. In this scenario, what would happen is that he would go on to the merchant, so train line, book his ticket, go to checkout, and instead of paying with his card, because he's got no money, he hits Request to Pay, and I receive, so that's the Request to Pay button at the bottom. At that point, he can choose via which social channel I should receive his request for me to pay for the item in his basket. So in this case, it's training shoes. So he's going to decide to send it to me via WhatsApp. So he chooses me, I then receive a message in WhatsApp with a tokenized URL in it and any other additional content that he might want to send. He can also pin lock that transaction, so I need the pin in order to open it. And when I hit that URL that appears in WhatsApp or Messenger, it takes me into his basket, where I then enter my payment method, be it my Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, whatever it may be, to fulfill that payment on his behalf. So he gets a ticket, I've paid for it. That's the premise of Request to Pay. There are a number of use cases for that, one of which is through collections. So that would be if I'm a utility company and I have a customer who's late with their payment, I can use this platform to send via social networks and messaging platforms a WhatsApp message saying, Mark, you're late with your £20 electricity payment. This is Eon. Click this URL. It authenticates me into my account and I can make a payment. I can even store my card in that environment so I can do it through one click. There's also an opportunity, and one that we will announce shortly. Contract's just been signed with one of the world's leading charities, where they are using this from a donations gifting perspective to encourage people to make donations over social networks, and therefore then be able to engage with those customers over those channels that they choose, or their customers or donators choose to use.
So is this white label or is it branded?
So it's white label. So our go-to-market strategy, if you like, is rather than having me running around different merchants saying, please implement RTP, is to work with wholesalers of alternative payment methods, of which there are several, and one of which we're working with, who have integrated into their platform hundreds of PSPs and merchant acquirers who therefore have connected to them hundreds of thousands, if not more, merchants. So to deploy RTP on their platform, once it's deployed on that platform, then it's available to any merchant who's connected to any of the PSPs connected to their platform. So not that I'm lazy, but I just don't fancy running around every merchant known to man. And I think with the charity that I'm discussing, clearly that was a one-to-one sale, and that frankly has been our first commercial deployment of this technology, which has taken us about a year and a half to develop, make secure, robust, industrialised. So that's our first deployment, and then I think following on from that, we'll announce a contract with one of these wholesale alternative payment method providers. And going back to my last kind of use case, there are many, but the last one we'll talk about today is in countries where there are a lack of payment options, i.e. people with credit, debit cards, and the ability to pay online, this offers them the opportunity to buy online by asking their friends or families living and working abroad who do have a payment method to make those payments on their behalf. So in India, in the Philippines, in other parts of Asia, it uses the channel that they communicate with their friends and family with every day anyway, and B, it doesn't require that person who wants to make an online purchase to have a payment method in order to do it, and it doesn't require that the family member in the States has to spend money sending that through traditional Western Union channels that we know is expensive and takes time, etc. So that's request to pay. What we are also doing, so I think our partner on MySQUAR piece at the moment, I think we've discussed that. I think we're all aware of how we're working together. I'm happy to talk about it more in the Q&A or afterwards. And this is just to reinforce one of the reasons why we signed this commercial agreement with MySQUAR is because of the access to those customers in those environments. Clearly users who do use social media all the time. And so my last point about RTP is to use that in a remittance solution. So we are enabling international money remittance from, well, you can see the countries, to countries in Asia, using RTP as a mechanism for requesting that money and for the user to then send that money using existing rails of money transfer organisations. So to take it into a social environment that their customers communicate with daily, rather than enabling them, or rather than them having to go outside of that social environment to send money back and forth. I'm not sure how much time I've had, but pretty much.
Pretty well done. Have you got a banking licence in all these countries?
So we don't have a banking licence, that's why we work with partners who do. So we're a young organisation, we've developed this technology and are in the process of developing the things I talk about here, which are near completion, and we're signing commercial contracts. What I'm not doing is spending time and effort buying banking licences and getting international money remittance licences or getting PCI DSS compliance, because that will slow my business down. I come from a company which some of you may have heard of called Skrill. So I'm well aware of the mechanics and mechanisms that you need to have in place to do this, along with KYC, and we'll leverage partners to do that for us and use their rails.
So have we got any questions? I mean, I'd just like to ask while people are thinking about that. I mean, kind of what's in it for investors? Are you going to go to one of the markets? Is that the plan? Is that partly why you're here spreading the word?
It is partly why I'm here, yes, spreading the word. So that is the plan to do that. I think one of the things that potential investors want to see is some traction and some contracts in place and the commercials that go with that, which is what we are getting to now. So it's an early chance to put myself in front of you and have a conversation here and afterwards, and hopefully to follow on around the progress of our business and keep you informed of how we're progressing.
Any thoughts? Would investors be interested in this? What questions are in people's minds about all this?
What percentage of your revenues does MySQUAR represent?
So at the moment, it doesn't represent any percentage of our revenues. So we have a commercial agreement with MySQUAR to leverage their customer base, and we're deploying that technology at the moment.
And you mentioned there were several wholesalers. Does that mean that others could come in and do this? And how unique is what you're doing?
Okay, so my reference to wholesalers is companies who provide access to a number of different alternative payment methods. So those being PayPal, Alipay, PaySafeCard, etc. And we would be an alternative payment method that sat within that environment. There is currently no competitor for RTP. So RTP does not exist anywhere else other than here.
Should we have a thought from Zach Meir at this point?
Yes, I'm interested in both these companies in the sense that you've got that symbiotic relationship. It strikes me that you might actually be an easier investment proposition to understand for most people than the MySQUAR.
So I can't comment around the MySQUAR investment proposition.
In the sense you've got lots of revenue streams and you're actually already sort of up and running, and you probably come to, when you go to market, you'll be going at a later stage than MySQUAR has.
So I think it is inherently a relatively simple proposition in that it's real life. Probably for most people here can, in their head, understand it and get it and probably think it makes sense. And I think it would be wrong to assume that it's been a simple process to get to where we are now. It's taken significant time and effort to get there. And I think entering a market such as Myanmar through the partnership with MySQUAR does enable us to have access in a area and deliver our services, which are fairly embryonic, but are, yes, gaining traction, and we are signing contracts.
Can you reassure me on barriers to entry? I mean, both MySQUAR and your company, I can just see, WorldPay or Facebook could just click their fingers and you're out. And also anybody else, I can just turn up and say, thank you for the idea, I'm going to do Zach Pay.
So you could indeed do Zach Pay, and it's taken us 2 years to get to this point. Payments is a difficult world, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, and there are a number of hurdles to get through, not least the connections into those social networks and messaging channels, of which we have 24. But yes, Facebook could do it, but then it's a Facebook to Facebook communication. And in some regions, that's not necessarily where customers want to spend all their time, and you're defining what channels they have to use in order to do that. So there's also a reluctance from the merchants that I've spoken to about providing a Facebook-esque type payment button on their websites. Whereas as a white label solution, you're not a threat to the merchants, you're not a threat to the other payment providers or card schemes, you're an enabler really. Because we don't process the payment gets processed by the existing payment. So whoever ends up making a payment, whether it be by PayPal or Visa or MasterCard, they run through the same rails. We take a trim out of the revenue generated by the payment provider by facilitating that connection from the merchant to the two consumers via social networks and messaging channels.
Any more questions?
Yes. Just a quick one. I really like the idea of RTP and how that works. Are there any tax implications about someone making a purchase through, say, an e-commerce store, buying some trainers in the UK and it being paid for by someone in the States, for example?
So there are, so potentially yes, and we're working with it, particularly on the schemes perspective, so on MasterCard and Visa, on the interchange. So we're working with them. I think, don't quote me, but I believe we're going to get to a point where we can do this without a detrimental tax impact on our business.
Ah, and a question here.
Hi, that was really interesting, Annie Kermy, and I'm going to practice reverse RTP on my children, actually.
Well, that's a request to never get paid, probably.
We're going to have a go.
Yeah.
I was just curious, you mentioned the fact that you're not looking at any regulatory, well, you're going to a regulatory piece, and I was just wondering, which geography are you looking at the regulatory aspects?
So when we talk about regulation,
Yeah.
there are two parts. For RTP, remember, we're not a payment provider.
Mm-hmm.
We're a connector, if you like, between whoever wants something paid for, the requester, and the person who ends up paying. The existing payment channel remains the same. So Dad goes to that merchant page and puts his Visa number in. We don't handle, process, touch the money, hence no PCI or legislative requirements from that perspective. We take a trim out of that revenue. On the remittance piece, which clearly you do need banking licenses, you do need international money remittance licenses, you do need KYC procedures. So with the partner we will launch with in the UAE, who already have an application to do money remittance internationally, we're a social layer that sits within that app to allow people to send and receive funds and request funds over those social networks and messaging channels. So we ride upon the existing rails without the burden upon having to have those regulatory environments.
That's great, and I understand that. The only thing I would just add to that is, in terms of entry to business, things like banking licenses really help organisations because they're one of the biggest barriers, and so they protect, sort of you as well as, becoming an example. And the other thing I would just say is, with the growth of cyber threats, it's very easy to look at things like phishing and things like that and how they can damage the reputation of a company, especially a young one, very quickly. And it would be interesting to know what kind of precautions you're taking. We don't have to discuss it now, but just as a few points.
So I agree with both things you've said. And I spent 18 months living and working in Manila, working with the central bank there to deliver a payment solution for overseas Filipino workers. So I understand the pain that goes with that, but I also understand the value of having that in place. And I'm not saying that we won't ever do that. I'm saying at the moment it's a kind of return on investment and speed to market perspective. So I'm happy to talk more about that later on.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, interesting session. Yeah.